Raliya was never meant to survive. That's what her only friend said just before he tried to destroy her. Long ago, deep in Africa, there was a quiet kingdom called Kaduma. It was surrounded by tall mountains, wide grasslands, and thick forests. At night, the stars filled the sky, and the moon lit up everything with a soft silver light. The people of Kaduma loved the moon. They believed it watched over them. They told old stories about its power. Some even believed the moon chose people for a special purpose. On one quiet night, the full moon looked bigger than ever. It felt like something was about to happen. In a small hut at the edge of the village, a woman named Naima was giving birth. Her husband, Kano, waited outside, nervous and afraid. People in the village whispered about an old prophecy. It said a child would be born with the power of the sky, the land, and the stars. Some said this child would save them. Others said she would bring danger. At midnight, the baby was born. Her name was Raliya. The moment she cried, everything stopped. The wind went quiet. Animals lifted their heads. The trees shook. The moonlight got brighter, shining right onto her. Some people smiled and called her a gift. Others whispered, "This is a curse." As Raliya grew, strange things started to happen. The night she was born had changed the land. The forests near the village glowed under moonlight. Predators became calm. Small animals stopped being afraid. The rivers looked cleaner. The air felt lighter. Naima, her mother, loved her deeply. She believed Raliya's powers were special. But her father, Kano, was unsure. He was proud, but also afraid. What if the prophecy meant something bad? Would people accept their daughter or turn against her? Raliya learned quickly. By the time she could walk, the moon seemed to follow her. When she laughed, the wind danced around her. When she cried, dark clouds formed and rain fell. Birds sat on her shoulders. Even wild wolves didn't fear her. People in the village didn't know what to do. Some avoided her. Some whispered prayers when she passed. The elders argued. Should they train her? Should they hide her? Could her powers be controlled? Raliya noticed the fear. The children who once played with her now stayed away. She felt lonely. Her only peace came in the wild, where the trees didn't fear her, and the moon always stayed close. One day, a man named Atim came to the village. He was a teacher from far away, sent to help the children learn. From the moment he arrived, he felt something powerful in the air. The villagers watched him carefully. They didn't trust outsiders easily. Raliya watched him too. She had stopped expecting anyone to be kind, but Atim didn't stare at her with fear or with worship like the others. When their eyes met, he looked at her like a normal person. They spoke for the first time by the river. Raliya was sitting alone, drawing shapes in the water. "You like this place?" Atim asked. She nodded. "The river doesn't fear me." Atim paused. "Do you fear yourself?" Raliya looked away. She didn't answer, but Atim didn't push. He just sat with her. And for the first time in years, she felt something new, trust. As time passed, Atim noticed things. The way the air felt still around her. How animals listened to her. How her eyes seemed to shine like the moon when she was thinking. Then, one stormy night, everything changed. A villager shouted that Raliya had cursed the land. His words hurt her deeply. Something inside her broke. The sky turned black. A strong wind hit the village. Trees fell, lightning flashed, but no rain came. Raliya couldn't stop it. Her power was out of control. She ran into the forest. Atim found her. He didn't run from her. He walked toward her, even with the storm around them. "You're not cursed, Raliya," he said. You're strong. Power isn't bad unless you make it bad." His voice calmed her. The storm slowed. The sky cleared. Everything went quiet. Raliya stared at him. No one had ever said something like that to her. No one had ever believed in her like that. After the storm, Raliya and Etim returned to the village. They went to the Temple of Elders, a place full of old scrolls and secrets. Deep inside, they found something shocking. The prophecy had been changed a long time ago. The original words said, "The moon's chosen will decide the fate of the world. She will bring a new age, or end everything." This meant Raliya's power wasn't just about Kaduma. It could change the whole world. But someone had hidden this truth. Why? And who? Raliya made a choice. She wouldn't run from her power anymore. She would learn to control it. Etim helped her. He became her guide. Together, they trained. She practiced using the magic in her blood. They studied more scrolls. They learned forgotten truths about the moon's chosen. But danger was close. The prophecy said she would either save Kaduma or destroy it. And far away, something was watching, waiting for her power to grow. One night, the moon was full again. The air felt heavy. Something pulled at Raliya, like invisible strings tugging her toward the forest. She followed the feeling, her heart beating fast. The trees whispered in the wind. Then, a low growl echoed in the dark. Raliya froze. Two yellow eyes glowed in the mist. A huge shadow moved. Its shape changed, first a beast, then something like a ghost. Its skin looked like the night sky, with glowing silver lines running through it. It wasn't a normal animal. It wasn't a spirit either. It was both. And somehow, she knew it was here for her. Raliya took a small step forward. The creature lowered its head and stared at her. It didn't growl. It didn't attack. It was waiting. She could feel its power. Her own energy stirred, like it was answering the creature. "What are you?" she whispered. The creature didn't speak with words. It breathed out hot air that smelled like rain and soil. Its body crackled with raw power, like it had come from another world. Then it turned and started walking toward the village. Raliya's chest tightened. Its footsteps shook the ground. The air around it grew thick with energy. "No," she said quietly, stepping in its path. The beast let out a roar. The trees shook. If it reached the village, people would die. She had to stop it. Power surged through her. The wind whipped around her body. Her skin tingled with energy. But it was too much. She was losing control again. Could she stop it? Or would she make things worse? For the first time, she wasn't just scared of her powers. She was scared of failing. The beast stopped at the edge of a clearing. Raliya stood in front of it, alone. The moon lit them both. The creature spoke, not with a mouth, but inside her mind. "You are the child of the moon, the one between worlds, but are you strong enough for what comes next?" Raliya's heart pounded. The voice felt like it was inside her bones. She clenched her fists. "I don't have a choice." The creature smiled. Then it attacked. The fight began like a storm. Raliya called on the wind, blasting the beast with bursts of air. It moved fast, jumping between solid and shadow. When it struck the ground, the earth cracked open. She fought back harder. Lightning lit up the sky. Vines shot from the ground to grab the beast. But it broke free. It was too strong. It wasn't just fighting her. It was testing her. Raliya was getting tired. Her arms felt heavy. Her powers were slipping. They were wild now, out of her hands, and the beast knew it. "Control yourself," she whispered. But the storm inside her wouldn't stop. The beast lunged. Raliya panicked and reached for everything she had. She called on the full light of the moon. It burst from her hands, blinding and sharp. For a moment, she felt powerful, like nothing could touch her. Then everything went numb. The power was too much. It started eating away at her. She couldn't hold it. The creature's voice echoed in her head. "You can't control me, because you can't control yourself." She gasped and stumbled back. The words hit her. They were true. This wasn't just a fight with the beast. It was a fight with herself. Then something changed. She felt the moon, not as a force of power, but as something calm. She stopped trying to win. She let go of the rage. Her breathing slowed, and the beast paused. Raliya opened her eyes. They no longer burned with wild power. They were steady, clear. "I understand now," she said quietly. She didn't use force. She used balance. The wind softened. The ground stilled. Water rose up, wrapping the beast in silver light. The creature roared, then vanished into the air. The battle was over. The forest went silent. Raliya stood alone, breathing hard, staring at the spot where the creature had disappeared. The moon still shone above her, bright and quiet. She understood now. The creature wasn't her enemy. It was a test. It was a part of her. And for the first time, Raliya didn't feel like a curse. She felt whole. She walked back to the village. People stared at her in shock. No one spoke. Animals followed behind her like she was their leader. The village elder stepped forward. His voice shook. "What are you?" Raliya looked him in the eye. "I am Raliya," she said, "and I'm ready." The next day, the elders called her to speak. "The moon has chosen you," the chief said, "but will you choose us?" Everyone waited. Raliya smiled. "I will protect Kaduma, not because I was chosen, because this is my home." This time, when the villagers knelt, it wasn't from fear. It was respect. That night, Raliya stood on the highest hill, looking up at the moon. She wasn't just the child from the prophecy anymore. She was the protector of Kaduma. But her story wasn't over. The wind carried her name through the trees. She still had questions. Where had the creature come from? Why had it tested her? And why did it feel like this was just the beginning? She still trusted Etim. He had been her first friend, her guide. But lately, something felt off. He avoided her eyes. He went off alone for hours. His voice didn't sound as warm as before. One evening, under the moonlight, she found him by the river. His fists were tight. His face was hard. "Etim," she said. He flinched, then turned around. "What's wrong?" she asked. There was a long silence. Then he spoke, cold and sharp. "You weren't supposed to survive." Raliya froze. The wind stopped. The river went quiet. "What did you say?" she whispered. Etim's face didn't change. "I didn't want it to happen like this. But the prophecy, it never spoke of a protector. It spoke of destruction. It spoke of you." It hit her like a knife. Her only friend had betrayed her. "Since when?" she asked, her voice shaking. Etim didn't look sorry. "Since the beginning." People stepped out of the shadows. Elders, warriors, people she had trusted. She had saved them. Now they stood against her. "The prophecy is not complete," one elder said. "You are powerful, Raliya, but power without limits is a threat. The beast was a warning. If you live, Kaduma will fall." "You don't understand," Raliya said. Etim stepped forward. "No, you don't." Then the warriors attacked. The people who once feared her, now wanted to destroy her. Raliya ran into the jungle. Her breath was loud. Her heart pounded. Branches scratched her arms. The moon lit her path through the trees. She didn't want to fight them, but they wouldn't stop. Behind her, she heard Etim's voice. "Don't make this harder, Raliya. You were never meant to rule." Her chest ached. He had lied to her. He had planned this from the start. Then she heard something else. A whisper on the wind. It wasn't her pursuers. It was older, colder. It came from deep inside the jungle. Suddenly, Raliya knew the beast hadn't been her enemy. It had been a warning. She stumbled into a clearing and collapsed near a cave. Her hands shook. Her breath was short. She was alone again, but not broken. She looked into the cave. It wasn't normal. It buzzed with strange energy. The air around it felt heavy, ancient. She got to her feet and stepped inside. The walls were covered in carvings, symbols older than the village. They told a different story, not one child. Two, one to protect, one to destroy. Her fingers traced the shapes. Her heart sank. It had never been her. It had always been Etim. Raliya stepped out of the cave just as the sun started to rise. Light spilled over the trees. The jungle looked calm, but inside her everything had changed. She now knew the truth. Etim was the other one, the betrayer, the destroyer. She had never been the threat. He was. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She stood tall. Her path was clear now. She would go back. She would face him. She would protect Kaduma, no matter the cost. The village had turned against her. The people had believed a lie, but she would not give up on them. There was still time to stop what was coming, even if it meant standing alone. The war hadn't started with a battle. It had started with a lie. Now, Raliya was ready for the truth, and the real fight was just beginning. Raliya returned to Kaduma under the cover of night. She stayed in the shadows, moving through the trees at the edge of the village. Her body ached, but her mind was clear. She had to be careful. Etim had turned the elders against her. The people believed she was dangerous. If they saw her now, they might try to capture her, or worse, but she couldn't stay hidden forever. She needed answers. She needed to stop Etim. The next day, she crept toward the Temple of Elders. This was where it all began, and maybe where it could end. Inside, she found the scrolls again. She flipped through them, her hands steady. The old carvings she saw in the cave were real. The prophecy had always been about two, but the parts about the destroyer had been erased from the village's records. Someone had planned this for a long time. Etim had been raised to bring an end to Kaduma. But why? Then she heard a voice. "You shouldn't have come back." Etim stood in the doorway. His face was calm, but his eyes were full of fire. "You lied," Raliya said. He stepped closer. "I did what I had to. The prophecy was clear. One of us would bring peace. The other would bring ruin. I just made sure it wasn't you. You used me. I trained you. I taught you. I gave you control. Without me, you'd still be running from your powers. You trained me," she said, her voice rising, "because you needed me to be strong, so you could break me." Etim didn't answer. The ground shook. The air grew thick with energy. Etim raised his hand. Power sparked at his fingertips. "This is the end, Raliya." She stood tall. "No," she said. "This is the beginning." The temple shook as their powers clashed. Etim struck first. A wave of fire shot across the floor. Raliya dove aside, rolling behind a stone pillar. The scrolls burned behind her. She clenched her fists, heart racing. She didn't want to fight him, but he left her no choice. Etim's voice echoed through the chamber. "You still don't understand, do you? Kaduma is broken. This world is broken. It needs to be reborn." "By destroying it," she shouted back. "Yes," he said calmly, "so it can start again. clean, strong. I was chosen to finish what the old world began. Raliya stepped into the open. The moonlight poured in from the temple's high window, lighting her face. "No," she said. "You were chosen to test me, and I'm done running." Etim charged. The ground cracked beneath his feet. His magic roared, dark, fast, and heavy. But Raliya didn't flinch. She didn't attack out of fear. She didn't let her powers explode wildly. She focused. The wind circled around her. The earth steadied. The moonlight filled her body with calm strength. She met his attack head-on. Light against shadow. Their powers slammed into each other. The sound was like thunder. Walls cracked. Stone shattered. A statue of an elder crumbled beside them. Etim pushed harder, screaming. His power burned hot, wild, angry. Raliya stayed grounded. She didn't shout. She didn't rage. She simply stood her ground. And the storm inside her stayed still. Then it happened. Etim's energy wavered. His flames flickered. Raliya stepped forward, one hand outstretched. "You don't have to fall," she said softly. "You can still choose." His eyes flashed. "It's too late for me." He raised his hand again, but before he could strike, Raliya called the moonlight. It wrapped around him like water. Etim dropped to his knees. His power faded. His voice shook. "I thought I was the chosen one." "You were," she said, "just not the way you believed." The temple was quiet now. Etim knelt on the floor, surrounded by the soft glow of moonlight. His head hung low. The fire was gone. His power had faded. Raliya stood over him, not with pride, but with sadness. He had been her friend. And now he was broken by the very destiny he had tried to control. The elders arrived soon after. They had felt the power shaking the earth. They had seen the lights in the sky. They came ready to fight. But they stopped when they saw the truth. Etim defeated. Raliya calm and still. Not a destroyer. Not a threat. A protector. The village gathered at sunrise. Raliya stood before them, the first light of day glowing behind her. Etim was taken away, not as a prisoner, but as someone who needed healing. He had lost his way, but Raliya had shown mercy. That choice changed everything. The people didn't kneel this time. They stood with her, together. The prophecy had been wrong in one way. It didn't end in destruction or salvation. It began with choice, and Raliya chose peace. But deep in the forest, the cave still pulsed with power. The carvings told more stories, stories of others across the world, born under different moons. Raliya stood at the cave's edge one last time. She wasn't just the protector of Kaduma now. She was something more. A guide, a leader. Her journey was just beginning.
Please do well to subscribe, like, comment, and follow for more.